Thank you. All right, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for the event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap. I am super excited about this webinar. We have a great topic and a great panel here. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience, so if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for any of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your question and answer tab and submit your question, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. We may also address some of the questions during the course of the webinar, so please don't wait until we get to the question and answer time period to get your question in. And we also have a very interactive chat feature on this interface, and so we'll be chatting things out to you. Hopefully you'll be chatting things back to us, so please feel free to chat out your questions, comments, etc., and we'll take a look at those as we go through as well. And finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar. AppSec Risk. You can't manage what you can't measure. Our speakers today are Dan Beauregard, who is the DevSecOps evangelist at ZeroNorth. Brian Kirk, who is the head of customer success at ZeroNorth, and Joanne Godfrey, who's the director of product marketing at ZeroNorth. Thank you to all 3 of you for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. And Joanne, I know you are going to actually be moderating the discussion between Dan and Brian, so I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll take myself off camera and let you guys get right into it.
Thank you very much, Charlene. Welcome, everybody. And welcome Dan and Brian too. So why don't we kick things off with Dan? Why don't you start by giving us your take on the AppSec landscape and how and why it's changing today?
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. So, before we dive into the challenges AppSec and DevOps teams are having, gaining visibility of their AppSec programs, let's just take a couple minutes and step back and quickly talk about how we got into this predicament. It's amazing. It's been 20 years since the Agile Manifesto was first written, and it's been almost 12 years since DevOps was coined. It's amazing that it's been that long already. Like other evolutions or revolutions in technology or in the workforce, like virtualization, how it revolutionized how we put our data centers together and stuff. DevOps is different. DevOps is really a methodology and practice. It's a process. It involves people, process, and technology to make this successful for organizations. With organizations putting such an emphasis on building software, they're giving, business leaders are giving DevOps teams freedom to really go out and take advantage of the latest technologies and tooling to get any competitive advantage in the market. If we look at how DevOps has definitely changed how we build software. Going on the security side of things first, security has traditionally been really centralized in organizations and still is in many organizations today. There is a known owner. We know who owns security. Security teams own security. It's very predictable. Most often in traditional ways, it would come in at the end of the software development process. It was planned for, and with our long release cycles of the past, it caused no problems. And what that did is it made application security at least understood within the organization. If we look how DevOps is changing that model today, DevOps teams are very distributed. They break down features into little iteratives and work in distributed teams. And often you have multiple DevOps teams that feed, or development teams that really feed into a single application. That has made it very difficult for these centralized application security teams to gain visibility across all these distributed DevOps teams. What this has resulted in is security teams are pushing some of the responsibility for AppSec to the DevOps teams. So it's starting to become a shared ownership model. And what this shared ownership model has done is it's caused a very inconsistent way of measuring and enforcing AppSec across the organization. So if you think about DevOps teams, developers in IT and operations folks, they're not trained on security. They're not experts on security. My nephew just recently graduated a couple of years ago from university in computer science. I asked him, how many security courses did you take going through your education? His answer was 0. 0 courses were enforced on security for today's developers that are out there. I recently had met a couple newer engineers in the environment, and they confirmed the exact same thing. Security classes are not required for our developers. That means they must learn security within the workforce. And that's going to make it have very different, varied knowledge of security across all the different teams. So if we're putting this ownership on these teams to enforce security, and you got all this very knowledge, it's very difficult for the application security teams to really get a consistent view of where their program stands. Very often it's blind, it's an unknown, and that is actually very troubling knowing how much today's organizations depend on software. All right, so AppSec teams and DevOps teams are not aligned. In fact, they can't even agree on who owns application security. 67% of AppSec pros say that they own security, but only 39% of DevOps teams say that AppSec owns security. If they can't even agree on who owns it, how are we going to be ensured that all the important factors are taken care of, are tracked, are measured to ensure that we are delivering secure software to production? Secondly, these teams are measured differently. DevOps teams are measured on how fast they can get software to market, how quickly and how many features are out there. They are also measured on times of how well these features are adding to the business, the underlying value of the business. These things are about speed in features and creativity and moving as fast as you possibly can go. That's not how AppSec teams are measured at all. They're measured on ensuring that certain risk scores are maintained or reducing the security vulnerabilities, the criticals, highs, all the way down the medium, making sure that nothing gets in production. These often conflict. And as a result, both teams find that it's extremely, extremely difficult for these teams to work together. 2/3 of both groups say the other group is difficult to work for. That is not a recipe for success. We need to fix this problem. We need to have these teams work together. DevOps is about communication and collaboration, and security teams must be part of this so that they can get that visibility into the AppSec program and how these teams are behaving across the organization.
Can you talk a little bit more? That's really interesting. And can you sort of dig in a little bit more and talk about some of the challenges facing DevOps teams specifically as they begin to incorporate security into their processes? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I talked about it's a shared model now, and the shared model is pushing responsibility onto these DevOps teams. Well, this actually has a dramatic effect on the DevOps teams as well. First off, I'll talk about tool choice and tool complexity. And in some cases, the developers, and we know developers just from the development practice in the software development lifecycle, have been given the freedom to choose the tools that help them. And they typically choose tools that help them move faster, make their processes more efficient. When it comes to security tools, they are not experts. There are so many different security tools that are out there today to help organizations. Static tools, dynamic tools, open source tools, container tools, cloud tools, infrastructure as code tools. There's numerous amounts out there. Without that expertise, it's very difficult them to ensure that they're protecting the entire software delivery lifecycle if they're given the tool choice. Many organizations will start off with a static analysis. And what we have found is, one tool, they think they're doing application security and they're off and running. And this obviously can leave some gaps, knowing that proprietary code makes up only a portion of the code that gets out into the market. There is so much open source and third-party code that's going out there that must be protected as well. This is a great example. In some cases, security teams may choose the tools for them, but then even if they do choose the tools, someone has to implement those tools in the DevOps process. And that is often given to the DevOps teams themselves. So now they got to integrate it with their repositories, their build tools, their pipelines. That is a very time-consuming task. It may be fairly simple for the first pipeline, the first team that you work with, but for larger organizations, that becomes unscalable, and it puts a lot of effort and maintainability on these DevOps teams maintaining these security tools within their process. And then the third one, and this actually really relates to both AppSec teams and DevOps teams. There's really no there's no AppSec standards. So there's a lack of AppSec standards out there, meaning that no tools behave the same way, no tools emit findings the same way. So it's very, very difficult to make sense of what is actually important that comes out of these findings. What is going to actually have a dramatic effect on my security of my applications? How do I rank order it? How do I remove the noise? And these are all questions. And a lot of times DevOps teams are not the ones best to answer those questions. When we talk about DevOps, the first thing that DevOps teams do is really automate as much as possible. This goes along with the speed, right? Let's automate as much as we possibly can do. It becomes repeatable and consistent when you are able to automate these processes. In the last survey on the state of DevOps by DORA, it was found that only 31% of the elite are the best and most mature DevOps companies out there. Only 31% of them are able to automate application security as part of their DevOps process. That is less than 1/3 of the best, the top 5%ers out there. As you can imagine, as you go down to the high, medium, and low, that's going to get much lower. That is not a great recipe for success. We need to figure out how to make AppSec part of DevOps.
So Brian, then on your end, what are you seeing from customers? What are you seeing in the field? What's the take on AppSec from the customer side and from the field? Can't hear you, Brian. We can't hear you.
There's a settings box up there, maybe at the top.
Yeah, check your settings up at the top, Brian, and you might have to change your microphone settings. I know you were having audio issues earlier, so yeah, you can try refreshing your browser, see if that works. Sorry, guys, for the technical difficulty there, but maybe he's back. Yeah, there you are. Yay! Sorry. I love it when technology works.
Headphones cut out 5 minutes ago. I thought that I was good here. But yeah, transitioning back to your question, Joanne, I think what we're hearing from CISOs is that AppSec visibility specifically is becoming increasingly important. With more and more attacks and threats happening at the application layer, CISOs are putting more and more emphasis on application security, as they should. And ultimately, they're responsible to the executive leadership team and their board and need to report on enterprise risk and make improvements to the organization's risk posture. So the big thing that we're hearing is that they need to enable a shared responsibility model for application security by making it easy for business units and development teams to understand and prioritize vulnerabilities. And to do that, they need a consistent and scalable approach to assessing and mitigating application security risks across the enterprise. And that gives rise to a whole bunch of questions that we keep hearing come up again and again. So the CISO and security teams need to answer questions like, topmost, like, what is the state of our application security program? Where are the gaps? Where are our biggest risks? What should we be prioritizing for remediation? Do we have 100% coverage of applications that are in production, internally, externally? Are the applications that handle personal identifiable information or HIPAA compliant information or money in compliance with industry standards? And are they de-risked? If they're not de-risked, do we know where those risks are, and are we okay with those decisions? What progress are we making in detecting and remediating vulnerabilities month over month? Are we finding and creating more vulnerabilities than we're remediating? What are those? Do they matter? Are they systemic across our teams? How do we enable our development teams to get better and develop more high quality, less vulnerable code? And last is, are we in compliance with our own policies? Have we set SLAs? Are we meeting those SLAs? If we say that we have an SLA that states that we don't have critical vulnerabilities in production for more than 30 days, can we back that up? Can I enforce the rule that I am putting forward to my development team? Or is this really just, if a tree falls in the woods, nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And the answer that we often hear, and where our customers routinely air frustrations, is trying to answer these seemingly basic questions.
So, well, guys, what do you see as the impact of this lack of visibility on the organization? Dan, what's your take on DevOps? How does that impact DevOps?
Yeah. I broke it down into kind of three main takes here. First off, if AppSec is not made part of the DevOps process and continues to be done ad hoc or behind the scenes, and most often at the end of the process, it really drives the cost of remediation up. There have been many studies done which suggest that fixing defects and a security fault vulnerability is a defect in the software. So fixing those late in the process, it costs an organization much more. First off, it requires developers to go back and remember what they were working on. If you're able to test it closer to when they worked on that, they can fix it much faster. So it causes them to take longer to fix it. But what it often does, and it's number 2 on the list here on impact on DevOps, it puts delivery dates at risk, and often will cause releases to be delayed, which could have other impacts on the business as well. But those probably are better than the third one, is choosing to let that software go into production with known vulnerabilities. And we know that with recent activities and breaches and so forth, that can be really detrimental for many organizations. So yeah, the impacts in DevOps are big as well, not just on the security teams.
And Brian, what about on the AppSec side? What are you hearing is the impact?
Yeah, so on the AppSec side, just coming back to, I think, the point that I last made, the big thing is, if I set a policy, if I have no means to gauge effectiveness or measure it or enforce it, it's like the policy doesn't exist. So that creates a huge gap in trying to actually implement a meaningful enterprise-wide policy. The next piece is that, critical vulnerabilities go unanswered. Going all the way back to the Equifax hack several years ago, that was a critical vulnerability that was well published and well known, and the tools existed to find it, but it was left in production and ultimately it was exploited to great consequence. And then the costs and the financial costs, the time and resources that go into trying to bridge this gap are immense. Everything from internally created tools to trying to hack together solutions, taking resources from development, money from security that ultimately just aren't solving the problem.
And I think these all bubble up to the business impact, the impact on the business. Ultimately, I think this is going to mean that the company is going to be delivering or using insecure software. And to your point, Brian, this lack of visibility is going to impact the organization's risk management program. The lack of data there's going to be a lack of data to define and implement and measure an enterprise-wide risk management program. I think digital transformation projects, which are often key strategic initiatives, they may well get stopped at the final control gate when serious security vulnerabilities and related AppSec compliance issues, they suddenly come to light. And that's obviously going to impact delivery timeframes and revenue projections, which obviously impact the business. And of course, last and definitely not least is the potential for security breaches, which you both talked about as well. That greatly impacts the risk to the business and the risk of compliance penalties and business loss and financial and legal costs and reputational and brand damage. That all, bubbles up to serious business risk as well. So obviously, there's a great deal of impact and risk if you don't have visibility of AppSec. And so let me ask you both, where do we go from here? Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, so, obviously, what can we do to bring AppSec and DevOps teams together, give AppSec teams that visibility that they need to be able to measure the risk across all of their application portfolio teams, but even beyond that, you measure so that you can actually improve. So giving them actionable insights to help them improve their program moving forward is absolutely critical. So let's, I don't think we can have to go too far looking here. I think we can learn a lot from DevOps and how DevOps has been able to do this over the years. DevOps, again, has been around for quite a while. And the first one I put up here is automation platforms. It's probably a combination of two, but they really started to come together for DevOps teams. Most DevOps teams start with automation. They start to automate as much of their practices as possible. You see them very often start with the build and the CI. You hear CI and CD, right? You start with the build process. Then a lot of times the test does come in, and then organizations get to the CD part, the continuous delivery. And while you're automating these processes, it makes them very repeatable and consistent. But that did not get DevOps teams all the way to where they were going, right? So they needed to be able to scale. And when you talk about scaling practices like this, you need a platform that can bring all of this together and make it repeatable across all the different teams in your organization. So we've seen a lot of great DevOps platforms start to evolve that include a lot of the components or most of the components of the software delivery lifecycle. When you get these platforms successfully running in organizations, and this is where a lot of DevOps during the maturity level, right? You start automation, then you start to build from there. You're then able to run your pipelines consistently and start to gather all of the metrics needed to start to understand how your pipelines are doing. How are they progressing? Can I start to put KPIs and OKRs around it so that we can start to improve that process? Continuous improvement is a key part of DevOps, and you can't do continuous improvement unless you have the data to make it visible. So coming up and adding AppSec and making AppSec a platform, an automated platform that can be integrated with your DevOps process is important. We've seen a couple other programs that can really help get AppSec included in DevOps. One that I think a lot of people are aware of is AppSec champions. So we've seen a lot of organizations adopting AppSec champions within their development process. This is very often you'll see per development team or DevOps team, you'll have one member that is considered the AppSec champion, probably self-chosen within the group, but they have an interest in security. They're willing to go get trained. They work with the security teams and start to bring some of that knowledge into the day-to-day operations for those development teams, those DevOps teams. And, one of the surveys that from a recent survey that we did here at ZeroNorth, the top 3 that came out that AppSec security champions added to the programs was they promoted AppSec best practices. Okay, great. They advocate for security. So the ears and eyes and ears for their and mouth to be able to advocate for the different teams. And they promote the adoption. So we have someone at least promoting that has been trained within the DevOps teams. The other one that I think is equally as important, and you don't hear much of it. We're actually going to be starting a survey on this topic very shortly. Would love everybody to participate, and that's on a concept called DevOps champions. And what a DevOps champion is really just the reverse. It's someone in application security that can become the most knowledgeable about DevOps. Really embed themselves in the DevOps process. Start to understand the different tools that they use, the processes that they use. What is their release cycle? How frequently are they, making changes? Understand the tooling that they use from a ticketing standpoint. How do they run their backlog? How do they take items off the backlog and defects management and prioritizing those things within their work environment? All of those things and understanding how DevOps works is actually extremely, extremely important for security to be successful working with DevOps. When you're able to do that, then you're going to be able to start to think about, how do I really connect and integrate AppSec within my DevOps process? It should not be something that's done behind the scenes at the end of the process. We're going to need to look at each and every aspect where AppSec should be connected to the process. Is it during the scanning of repositories? We need to check on every build, every pull commit, every pull and commit, every build, every pipeline that runs. Security must be embedded in that process. So if you're able to do that and have a platform that can actually connect to the DevOps process and collect the data, then you're going to be able to get that visibility that AppSec teams need to be successful. And that is what DevSecOps is all about. Really tightly integrating AppSec in the DevOps process. Any additional thoughts, Brian or Joanne, on that?
No, Dan, you took most of what I was going to say on the subject, so nothing to add.
Why didn't you? That was a great summary, Dan. Why don't we go ahead and then show everybody a little bit about the ZeroNorth DevSecOps platform, and as part of that, how it provides enterprise-wide analytics and reporting, basically a single source of truth on AppSec risk. So, Dan, why don't you start, and then Brian, maybe you can share some of the reports.
All right, love to do that. Okay. So us at ZeroNorth, we've developed a DevSecOps platform that really enables AppSec to be embedded in your DevOps process. So a lot of the things that I was just talking about, are things that we take to heart, and we really look at how we can bring these application security and DevOps teams together and work efficiently and make sure that code is delivered safe to production. So let me describe the ZeroNorth platform and how it works and how it gives security folks that visibility that they need. And I'm going to start over here on the left-hand side. So what the platform does is it first connects to the tooling, the application security tools that are out there. Again, from the static tools, dynamic tools, open source tools, container, cloud, any tool, scanning tool that needs to be part of your software delivery process. What we do is we integrate those tools with ZeroNorth. Now, what we also we are a software as a service platform, so we run up in the cloud. We also include in our platform, meaning that it's just part of our platform, a selection of open source scanning tools across these tool types that can be leveraged at no additional cost for organizations looking to get their program running. So if you're not leveraging tools today, you can get the platform from ZeroNorth. You can leverage open source tools and get a baseline of your program. And then if you need to, moving forward, start to embed commercial tools into the program as well. Once we have the tooling connected to ZeroNorth, then we go look at your DevOps processes and pipelines. And that's where we're going to connect ZeroNorth to those processes. And why are we connecting ZeroNorth? It is very time consuming, takes a lot of management to connect each and every tool. And remember, each and every tool works differently. So the way you connect it, the way you have to management is different for each tool. You have to become an expert in every tool. And then you have to maintain that going forward. Very time consuming. You connect one platform to your DevOps process, and ZeroNorth will orchestrate the scanning tools when they need to run during your pipeline. By automating that process, we take that management away from off the developer's shoulders. It allows us to ingest all of your vulnerability data across all of your different teams. So we're getting a great view of all the data coming in into a central database within ZeroNorth. Now, this is where we perform a lot of different IP on that data. First off, I mentioned earlier, no tools emit findings in the same way. So we take the findings from all of these tools and we normalize that data into a common risk framework, so that we can start to analyze that data for you. We're able to compress the data within tools. We can deduplicate and compress across like tools, and we actually can link and can correlate across different tools, from static and dynamic tools, for example. We have seen compression rates in the order of 90-1 by removing noise, removing duplicates, and really finding what is important for your organization to make sure that you're successful. We do this, and at the same time, we are able to open up remediation tickets, defects, in your developer's ticketing system. So for the developers, as we put down here, developer friendly. They don't have to manage the tools. They don't have to try to make sense of the data. That will be part of the automation platform. They just get tickets, security defect tickets, inside of their ticketing system that they need to work on. So take a lot of that burden off of the developers. By automating it, we accelerate the pipeline. But by doing so, and for this webinar, we also have all of that data available for the CISO, application security teams, business leaders, all the stakeholders that need to have access to that data to be able to measure how their program is doing, and how to improve their program moving forward. And also to be able to enforce standards moving forward as well. But that visibility becomes possible because the platform collects all of the data and makes it available across the organization. And with that, Brian, I think we'll give some great examples of what that data can be used for.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So moving ahead to our reporting, just to emphasize one of Dan's points around normalization and compression of vulnerabilities. Anytime you look at a data or reporting problem, garbage in is garbage out. So what we're able to do within ZeroNorth is really set an apples to apples comparison of one tool to the next, one vulnerability to the next, to make sure that the reporting is all even and one thing is not very blown out of proportion with, call it 100 instances maybe of cross-site scripting in the same application component that was all really one linked vulnerability. So moving ahead to the reporting here, all of this can be done either on the enterprise. Dan, if you could go back one.
Oh, okay. So the moving ahead, you got me confused there. Sorry.
All of this can be done on the enterprise level, the business unit level, or the application level, giving a level of, or I guess, some flexibility in how the information is both presented and consumed across the executive, mid-management, and developer level. Now moving ahead and getting into some of the specifics of what we can visualize and develop in ZeroNorth. looking at multiple business units here with several tools, several scanning tools going on in each business unit, what you can take away from this is that the online business unit, the online banking business unit, has considerably more findings than some of the other business units, and that two of these columns are check marks and Veracode. So of those kind of commercial tools, like one, as a CISO, I'd ask myself, why am I paying for two commercial tools? Is this intentional? Is this carryover from a maybe an acquisition that I had made? And two, if they're scanning the same code, why am I getting different results? Drilling into that problem in ZeroNorth, you can actually compare those commercial tools side by side to see what's picking what up and which, if any of these, are potential false positives. But the other thing that you can look at and gather from this very quickly, what tools am I using? What tools am I using in each business unit? Is that consistent one to the next? And if it's not, why isn't it? If I have a policy to use a certain tool set or a certain scanning capability, whether it's SAS, DAST, or SCA across all business units, why is it more effective? Why am I getting more results in one versus the other? Just helps open up that dialogue and that line of questioning.
Brian, before you move on, there's a question here which I think is relevant to this particular slide, and that is, around incorporating pen testing vulnerabilities. How do we incorporate pen testing results into some of these graphs?
That's a great question, Joanne. So pen testing, usually manually done, and usually I would say the formats of those results can sometimes be difficult to work with. I've heard of everything from just Excel files that are human generated that developers have to go back and work with, to something that's like a JSON or a PDF output from some pen testing or Red Hat type company. All of those results can be ingested into ZeroNorth and potentially correlated depending on the data quality. But what you do see here is the kind of the overlay of some of those pen testing results put up against some of the automated scanning tools.
That's great. Thank you. You can carry on now.
So the next question that we get or we see come up a lot is, am I remediating at the same pace that I am creating vulnerabilities? And the answer to that question is usually no. But what we see here is this company, this customer, had onboarded a bunch of application components and applications into ZeroNorth. And kind of once they got things in, they started some remediation, and then it all just kind of fell off. And remediation and detections were relatively constant for a while, but in the last couple of months, detections have trended upwards again. So as an application security professional, I'd sit here and ask myself, why? Why are detections going up? Why have we not made progress on remediations? Is there more to this? And the answer is almost definitively yes. Of course there is. And then you can use this kind of information to go and drill into either specific applications or specific components to answer some of these questions, to figure out why are we making progress or why aren't we making progress. Next, just kind of like the stacked look of all of the targets or application components that exist in my environment. And again, this can be on the enterprise level or the business unit level or the application level. Where are the vast majority of my vulnerabilities? And this can be filtered to look at either just high or critical vulnerabilities or absolute value count of vulnerabilities. But kind of what you're seeing here is that NodeGoat artifact, that white hat WebGoat are putting out a significant amount of vulnerabilities and warrants further attention to go back to that dev team leader and drill in and probably create a plan of attack for remediating some of those as priority. looking at kind of risk priorities, one of the questions that we often see is, well, Brian, we've got all this great information in ZeroNorth. Like, where do I start? I'm using 10 tools across 10 different business units. Where do I start? There's just too much to bite into. I think historically, a lot of companies have just said, okay, we'll start with the high and critical and start with either the oldest ones or the applications that have the most absolute value, the highest absolute value of higher critical vulnerabilities. There's other ways to kind of cut into that. And how we've broken this chart out is we actually look at it and map it to OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. So in terms of absolute value, that third one has obviously the most vulnerabilities in there and could warrant a lot of attention. But the number in the bar is 24. There's 24 vulnerabilities that relate back to the OWASP top 10, which is, you know, a known entity for really helping triage priority of vulnerabilities. So we've organized this from highest to lowest. Can help a CISO or a VP of application security perhaps get a really clean look at where the effort should go, what business unit, what application should they dive into first. And then last, Dan, I think is one of my favorites. So I apologize, this is a little small and perhaps difficult to read. But what you're looking at here is a list of leading deficiencies and counts of those month over month. The idea here is what patterns exist within my development teams across any level of my organization. Is there something that is systemic? Is there a training deficiency where if I can provide training or help my developers to find a better way forward, not only can we remediate a vast amount of vulnerabilities, but we can prevent them from happening in the future. And if I've done that, am I getting better or am I getting worse? So looking at the one that's kind of highlighted here, the client password and comments, like obviously that's something that shouldn't be done. Over the last several months, it's gone from 4 counts of that to 7. We're getting worse. Like that to me warrants a training session to go back and look very specifically either with those individual developers or with those teams that this rolls up to bring attention to it. You can't stop a behavior unless attention is brought to that behavior. And it's possible that developers don't even realize that they've done this on a consistent basis. As a kind of a real world story, we were going through a report almost identical to this with a large Fortune 500 company. And there were 6 or 8 business CISOs or business CIOs, business unit CIOs on the line. And we were going through the report and one of the gentlemen read his and saw that one of his top offenders on this graph was just this, the client password in comments. And he stopped us in the middle of the presentation and said, Brian, is this reliable? And I said, well, yes, of course, this is reliable and this is real information. This is your information. He said, well, geez, like I need to go. If this is real, I need to take action on this right now, immediately. And that was a low-hanging fruit, critical vulnerability that he just had never gotten that level of visibility on before.
Well, thank you, both of you, for that great demo and for this webinar chat. Just to summarize quickly, so as companies go on their journey to DevSecOps, they do need a consistent and repeatable way to understand and to communicate and act on AppSec risk. Holistic, consistent AppSec visibility across the enterprise with actionable insights is critical for the CISO and the DevOps teams to do their jobs. The visibility is also needed to help drive shared responsibility and accountability for AppSec across the organization, and it makes it easy for business units and development teams to understand and then to prioritize vulnerabilities for remediation. And AppSec visibility will help drive a consistent and scalable approach to assessing and to mitigating application security risk across the enterprise. So with that, if you would like to learn more about the ZeroNorth platform or schedule a personal demo, you can go to go.zeronorth.io/reporting. And in addition, if you want to check out the Security Champions Empowering to Unite Security and DevOps survey report that Dan mentioned earlier, you can get that at go.zeronorth.io/champions. So I think that's it for the webinar part, but I believe there are some questions. Charlene, I'll hand over to you.
Absolutely. Yes, we have gotten some questions in, but there's plenty of time. If you do have a question for either Dan or Brian, go ahead and use the question and answer tab, or you can put it in the chat section. We'll move it over there for you. Okay, we've got some great questions in so far. Bob asks, do you feel that industry auditing compliance controls such as PCI, SOX, HIPAA, et cetera, are starting to include more AppSec controls since the DevOps Agile model has taken so much traction for the development environments now?
You want to take that one, Brian?
Yeah, so I would say that this is a little anecdotal, Bob. But from, I would say, my vantage point, my experience, I think the compliance controls have begun to institute more and more regulation that requires a strong application security program to solve. I would not say that they are application security specific, but the way to solve the kind of the high level problem that they're asking you to identify is via application security and via code quality. So things like HIPAA, which is like very protective of personally identifiable information. If there are usernames or social security numbers that are somehow embedded in your application, that's very difficult to find unless you have the right scanning tools in place to surface it. So you're really not in compliance with HIPAA unless you have a way to prove that you don't have that that information actually embedded in your code. Dan, any additional thoughts on that one?
No, I mean, I think it's continuing to become more important when we're so heavily reliant on software now that we need to include. I mean, PCI is just a great example. I mean, how many organizations that probably were brick and mortar before COVID started have now relied on software to control their business, and that they now are, need to not just ensure what they have within their building is compliant, but in behind their firewalls, they now have, externally facing applications that is controlling data, credit cards, and other things that need to be protected. And like you said, software, testing is the best way to ensure that you are actually protected.
All right.
One more word on that is, from what I'm also seeing is, some of the newer regulations on data privacy, especially, they are including specific requirements around application security as part of the regulation. I know that the NYDFS has a specific clause on vulnerabilities and remediation and AppSec risk. I think CCPA and maybe GDPR do as well. So it's definitely becoming much more prevalent and prominent in these regulations. And I think we'll see that as a trend going forward.
All right, great. Next question here, Suresh asks, what are the collaboration touch points of developers and ops team to protect security in DevSecOps?
I'll take a start on that one. I think one very important collaboration touch point is in defect grooming, right? So we're collecting security vulnerabilities and we're creating them as defects. The one time you do get your developers, your operations, and one missing, is your security folks into the same room to prioritize the work that needs to be done by the developers is during your defect grooming, and making sure that those properly get discussed and get prioritized and get handled appropriately. So that what I think would be the most important touch point that I think of outside of just general collaboration tools like Slack and others. So.
Yeah, I think from my vantage point, Dan, some of the most successful programs that we've seen have just been ones that are highly collaborative, and especially where you get that champion that's either a former security guy that's moved into ops or a former ops guy that's moved into security and understands the other's dilemma, and speak the language. Having that kind of technical continuity with both parties speaking the same language informally has led to what I've seen as the largest or biggest successes in this space.
All right, great. Let's see, next question. Excuse me, another one from Suresh. He asks, how can DevSecOps be adopted for legacy systems?
Dan,
I'm going to let you field that one.
Yeah. I mean,
Dan's like, no, I'm kidding.
no, it's not. I mean, it's a very common question, right? I mean, what if I'm still waterfall? What if I'm not doing a lot of the agile practices? That does not mean that DevOps does not work in those environments, right? And that's something that's really important. And so I think security falls into that same bracket, even though it's a legacy system on probably legacy infrastructure, because you can't change it over and stuff. It still needs to be protected. Let's not protect at the end of the process. If you're starting to do some DevOps, meaning let's start to automate some of the capabilities, even in legacy software on legacy infrastructure, you still can automate some capabilities and you still can embed testing at the appropriate levels and give your developers the chance to fix and remediate those things as early as possible in the process. And that is the key, and that will help you produce even safer legacy software as well.
I think.
Sorry.
So some of what I see is for legacy software that's in production and maybe not a current language. Oftentimes, I would say languages have fallen out of fashion, but these applications are still being run, and something else is either being developed to take its place, or the old application is like in some level of refactoring to create a microservices architecture out of the prior monolith. We still see scanning in those applications. I would say what we see happen is far more selective remediation. So obviously, if it's already built, if it's already or not currently being worked on, except for kind of periodic maintenance, then you can still scan it. And then I just see organizations being far more selective about how much effort they want to put in to maintain or remediate things that they find in those applications if they're due to be sunset.
All right, great. Excuse me. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. Bob asked another question here. Does the ZeroNorth product provide extensive customization capabilities to tailor to the client environments?
You want to take the first shot at that one, Brian?
I think the first shot there is yes. We do. It depends on your environment. It depends how you guys are set up, and everybody's environment is different. All of our customers are kind of snowflakes in that regards. There are best practices that we use. There are things that will fit universally in different environments. And then there are some things that our customer success and field engineering team can help build to customize the integration or the experience for individual customers. So yes, Bob, and we'd be happy to talk to you more about that further offline.
Since Brian works with all of our customers extremely closely, once in onboarding, I thought he'd be the first. But I mean, obviously, everybody's AppSec program is different. You got to be able to customize the capabilities to fit those environments. And like Brian said, super happy to to walk you through that and show you and work with you. So.
All right, great. Let's see. Next question here. Here's a good one. What are a couple key AppSec metrics that would help our organization get started measuring our program?
Yeah, so I think the biggest ones that we see being taken advantage of are internal rate of detection, internal rate of remediation, and overall scan progress. So, I mean, across those three, it covers how fast or how often am I creating vulnerabilities, how fast, how often am I fixing vulnerabilities, and then what kind of coverage do I have? Do I understand 100% of the risk in my environment? Or am I only scanning my modern production apps and all that legacy software is actually not being scanned? And I know that and can assess the risk there and make that choice. All three of those are things that can be set up and measured in ZeroNorth. The other things that we see being used are kind of high and critical SLAs for timelines to fix certain levels or criticalities of vulnerabilities that are created or discovered after they're pushed into production. And that kind of varies company to company based off of the risk tolerance and the exposure of that application.
All right, great. Well, we are about 4 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we might be able to squeeze in one more question, and then we're going to have to close out the question and answer session. Okay, how reliable are open source scanning tools, and could they be used against our production apps?
Yep, it's really simple answer to this one. It all depends on your application, your environment, what you're looking to achieve in your AppSec program. We have found, though, that it is a great way to get your application security program started. You can leverage the open source tools to get a baseline of where your program is. Test using open source, not costing you anything. You get to see where your vulnerabilities are. You get to assess that, measure that to see if that is, does that give you the protection that you're comfortable with, your organization's comfortable with? And if the answer is not, it's very easy to then go out and start looking at commercial tools and seeing if you can start to embed commercial tools into your program where appropriate. One of the things that is actually really, really cool and powerful, and I know we short in time here, Charlene, but within the ZeroNorth platform, you can see the results, like in one of the charts that Brian showed you, comparing different tools and the findings that you got. So you get a really good sense: is my open source tool missing critical stuff for my program? If the answer is no, when you compare it to a commercial tool, then you got your answer that yes, that open source tool is quite successful for our program.
Just adding on to that, Dan, I would just say that almost all, if not all, of our customers use at least one open source tool, if not as an exclusive scanner, to help augment their commercial tool. So, for instance, if you have Black Duck as your default SCA for all things that are in production, but you're financially restrained and only paying for a 10 gigabyte limit on that license to maybe scan some of those legacy systems, then perhaps we use OWASP dependency check orchestrated by ZeroNorth, which is included as part of your subscription. Now you can get full SCA coverage. And even if dependency check isn't 100% of Black Duck, let's say it's 60 or 70%, like your risk posture is significantly improved by having something scanning those applications to augment your commercial licenses.
Very cool. All right. Well, we are a minute to the end of the webinar, so I do want to close out question and answer and thank everybody who did submit questions. I think we got to all the questions, but if we didn't, I apologize. And please know that the folks from ZeroNorth are getting a copy of all the questions that came in, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline. Another quick reminder that today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. We will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand, and the webinar is also going to be living on the Security Boulevard website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. All right, real quick, before we close things down, I want to do that drawing for the 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So our first winner today is Bob D. Congratulations, Bob. Our second winner today is Julie H. Congratulations, Julie. Our third winner is Maria G. Congratulations, Maria. And our final winner today is Terrence L. Congratulations, Terrence. We'll be following up with all 4 of you via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. Dan, Brian, Joanne, thank you all so much for a great webinar today. Lots of great information. I do appreciate it. And I know the audience got a lot out of it also. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Charlene.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks.
I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody. Please stay safe.